zone and wherever you're dialing in from, hello. This is another in a series of our Fiduciary Best Practice webcasts. My name is Scott Fisher, and I'm a Senior Investment Advisor with Northwest Capital Management. And you can tell I'm senior because look at the color of my hair. And joining me today is Christine Mole, and she is an ERISA attorney. And she has been one for how many years now, Christine?
For 14 years.
And you told me that you knew from when you were in kindergarten that you wanted to be an ERISA attorney, right?
Yeah, of course. Actually, when I got this job, I had no idea what an ERISA attorney did. So yeah, it was a steep learning curve, but it's been very enjoyable 14 years. Love it.
Yeah, I love all the practitioners and warriors that work in the retirement space. It's a rewarding area, and I really appreciate others who have devoted their professional lives to it.
Agreed.
So I'm going to kick off right now. This is one of our favorite topics in the ERISA space. Consultants are always talking with plan sponsors about what they have a fiduciary duty about and what they don't. And there are a couple of things that folks like to characterize these as either settlor or fiduciary functions. So Christine, would you kind of just give us a high level, what's the difference between those two?
Yeah, and this is such an important question because a lot of people who deal with qualified plans are under a misimpression that everything that they do with the plan is a fiduciary function and they have a fiduciary duty and therefore personal liability if things go wrong. And that is not true. There are something called settlor functions which don't carry any sort of fiduciary duty with them. And that would be things like the decision to set up a plan or the decision on how to design the plan as far as what kind of employer contributions are being made to the plan, and the decision to amend the plan for certain things, and then also termination of a plan. Those are all settlor functions. And it's important also to know this distinction because any sort of costs for settlor functions can't be paid from plan assets. And so that also, so you amend your plans to add loans, something like that, that cost can't be paid from plan assets. But on the fiduciary side, costs for those services generally can be paid from plan assets. And fiduciary functions are things like, protecting plan assets, the way you handle plan assets, selecting your service providers, and then of course selecting the investments for the plan. Those are all fiduciary functions.
Okay. So the fiduciary functions and the settlor functions might both affect the participants, but one is really kind of a business decision, and the other is more of a I have to act in the participant's best interest. Okay, I understand.
Exactly.
You slipped a comment in there though that I want to follow up on. You said something about personal liability. What's that about?
Yeah, that's what gets everybody really worried about being a fiduciary to a qualified plan. And unfortunately, I have to deliver this message to any new member on a pension committee that I'm counsel to. And oftentimes they're surprised that if you are a fiduciary to a plan, you do have personal liability in if things go wrong. So let's say, you're a fiduciary, you select a bad investment and your plan participants elect to invest in that investment and it loses money and you didn't go through the right process to select that investment, you have personal liability for those losses. So that gets people pretty scared, and that's really why we have trainings like this.
Okay, so I'm going to clarify a little bit here. So I've heard this distinction made that you can be wrong as a fiduciary as long as you followed a sound process.
Right. That it's all about the process.
Okay.
There's no 20/20 hindsight, which is really nice. I mean, because investments sometimes do lose money. And so there's no, it's about how you implement that decision, how you make that decision, and how you document that decision. That's the important thing. And as long as you've gone through the right process, then you don't have fiduciary liability on the other side, even if it turns out to be the wrong decision.
Okay, so we need to be thoughtful, we need to be well-informed, and we need to document. And then if the investment doesn't work out, at least we followed the rules and we're not liable. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And what we find in our DOL investigations with our clients is one of the things that they're asking for are plan committee minutes. And you should have those. You should have something that proves that you've at least reviewed the plan investments on a quarterly basis, and that you've reviewed your fees and all those other fiduciary functions you need to do. You need to have some documentation to prove that.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think we'll hit on that a couple of times further on in the presentation. So let's just kind of go over some of the basics, sort of the rules of the fiduciary rules of the road that are actually spelled out by ERISA, the law passed in 1974. So what's first in our list, Christine?
Right, the exclusive benefit rule. This is just, as a fiduciary, you have to operate in the best interest of plan participants. That is the rule. You can't be sitting at the table as a fiduciary and have other interests, like your own personal interests, the interests of the company, anything like that. You have to be acting in best interest of plan participants. And that's the exclusive benefit rule. It makes it hard sometimes because you're sitting at that table. You might be the president of the company or the CEO of the company. And it's hard to put aside those interests and focus on the plan participants, but you have to do that when you're making fiduciary decisions.
Okay, so that kind of would capture that idea of settlor. There's things that are business decisions, like I'm going to add a match to the plan, or I'm going to change the waiting periods. All those do affect participants, but they're really business decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, and then what's next?
And then diversification. This one isn't that big of a deal. Basically, the rule says you have to diversify your plan assets to minimize risk of loss to the plan participants, or you have to have diverse investment alternatives. But it says, what the rule says is you have to have at least 3 investment alternatives, and I don't know, all of my plans have more than 3 these days, so not really a big deal. I guess it could potentially be a big deal if somebody, if for some reason you decided to limit your investment alternatives significantly, but I don't. If you have a good investment manager on board, that's not going to happen.
And these investments, they must be distinct in terms of their risk profile and their nature. So
that's the idea. Yeah, that's the idea.
Stocks, bonds, and cash would be a classic example, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And then I've heard a lot about reasonable fees. Now, not lowest fee, but reasonable fees. Now, what can you kind of tease that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, this is where a lot of the litigation is happening these days on just whether or not fees paid by the plan and the plan participants are reasonable. And, you're exactly right that it doesn't have to be lowest.
Okay.
But you have to have, hopefully in those minutes, reasons why you haven't selected, for example, the investment option with the lowest fees. There's going to be reasons why you wouldn't, but you need to document that. Because if you don't document that, you can have participants come back at you and say, hey, over the life of my account in this plan, you owe me X because I was paying higher fees than what you could have gotten. Gotcha. And so you just need to have that documented. Same goes for service providers. So the fees that are being paid to service providers like record keepers, TPAs, investment managers, all those also need to be reasonable, and you need to know what you're paying them.
Okay. So there's a reasonableness test as opposed to a lowest fee test. Okay. That makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay. And
yeah, and that one is so important that all of my committees, I require at least an annual thorough review of all fees that are being paid by the plan, and we get it in the minutes and we document it. And I would just really stress that is very important.
oh, and some outside party conducts that kind of review, or
yeah, generally we try to get somebody who isn't, who doesn't have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
And if they do have a dog in the fight and they're still doing that, then I'm reviewing it carefully because I don't have a dog in the fight.
Right. So you don't want to have any kind of conflict of interest in there. I can understand. Right. And then there's this next one, number 4 on our list here. What's prudent expert rule about?
Right. This one sometimes comes as a shock to fiduciaries that you are meant to act in a way that an expert in the field, a prudent expert in the field, would act. So let's say that you are you've selected an investment. It tanked, participants file lawsuits. One of your defenses cannot be, well, I'm not an investment, I'm not a professional investment manager. That cannot be one of your defenses to the claim. So that's why you hire people, unless you yourself are have education in that field. You're going to want to hire prudent experts.
Yeah, you probably want to have somebody else to kind of share some of the blame, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I have actually a pretty sad story on this one. I have it. For some reason, the people that tend to run afoul of this rule are doctors and lawyers that think that they are extremely good at investments. And we had a doctor who was he was investing, the plan was pooled. So he was investing his money plus everybody else's money in the market, and because he wanted them to get really high returns. That's what he wanted for them, which is nice. But the problem was what he was doing wasn't prudent at all. And when the market crashed in 2008, so I was just a little newbie ERISA attorney. He called and he said, well, I've lost 90% of plan assets. But you know what, and he really should have only lost, 25, 30% at that time. And he just had all these things. Well, this is money I put in for them, so they don't have a claim, stuff like that. He was not acting like a prudent expert, and he had to make them whole, which was rough. So
okay, so that's that. So the test to write a fiduciary breach, I think is the way it's referred to, is to make the people whole for the damage you did. That's why it's personal, and that's why it's unlimited. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. You got to make them whole. You also, if you yourself made anything, you have to disgorge the profit. There's also civil penalties attached to breaches of fiduciary duty. So if you were to be, for instance, if the DOL came in this case, it was just making participants whole. But if the DOL had also come in and found this breach of fiduciary duty, which they easily could have, there would have been civil penalties on top of the damages.
Oh boy, that sounds rough. Okay, so why would anybody want to be a fiduciary?
Right, exactly.
Of course, the people out there will want to help folks save for retirement. We know that. Okay, so what's this last one? Adherence to plan document. I'm not sure I've ever heard that was a fiduciary.
Well, adherence to plan document, this is one that I see people mess up all the time. They don't realize what their plan actually says, but you're required to act in accordance with your plan documents. I had recently a client who came in, and they said that since they had set up their plan in like 2015, and at that time they had put in automatic enrollment provisions into their plan, but it was 2020 now, and they had never automatically enrolled anybody. Well, if the IRS had come in and found that they weren't adhering to the plan document, it would have been, there would have been significant penalties put on them. And so luckily there's programs, correction programs to fix it. They're going through it right now and putting them through a correction program to fix that error. But I just can't stress enough that maybe don't sit down and read the entire plan document, but at least sit down and read your summary plan description and make sure you know exactly what it says and that you're actually operating in accordance with it.
Got it. Okay, so our first question from the audience is a great one.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a definition or safe harbor for reasonable fees?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? There is not. There is not. What you usually do is you do benchmarking, and you like that benchmarking to be done by somebody who, again, doesn't have a dog in the fight. That's usually the best way to prove that fees are reasonable. There's certain materials out there that, will say, okay, if you have a plan this size with this many participants, these should be the fees you're paying to your investment providers and record keepers and other service providers to your plan. It's just one thing that goes into, you can't 100% rely on those. It's just one thing that goes into your thought process. But that's why, yeah, it's generally benchmarking, and it is going to differ by size of plan, area of the country, all that stuff.
Yeah, I can remember some of my colleagues who did that kind of fee benchmarking work. They would go into a service profile review to say, okay, reasonable fees in light of what you provide. So in other words, if your plan has lots of hand-holding service, like there's one-on-one counseling or something like that, that would certainly cost more than, say, if you're just an 800 number, and not a lot of service. So it sounds to me like it's one of those tricky ones where one man's reasonable might be another person's not so reasonable. Yep,
exactly. And that's why there's no safe harbor, unfortunately.
Okay. So let's bounce on to our next slide. This is the lawsuit area. This is where some of this stuff gets a little slippery. I like to call these the fiduciary follies. So can you give us a little high-level discussion about that Wells Fargo lawsuit? What's going on?
Yeah, so this is a big one because the plan is so big. The plan, I think, I don't know, billions and billions of dollars. What is it? About $40 billion plan and tens of thousands of employees. And basically it just got filed, and what they're saying, what the plaintiffs are saying in this, the participants are saying, is that Wells Fargo put a whole bunch of proprietary funds in the lineup without doing their due diligence on other investment alternatives. Oh, and so they basically enriched themselves at the detriment of their plan participants. So we'll see where it goes, but just the amount of money in this lawsuit is just staggering. Yeah. So it'll be interesting.
And it would be interesting to see if they actually had outside experts helping them, or did they rely on their own investment team who said, oh yeah, our stuff is great.
Yeah, exactly. Why would you want to invest in anything different? We're great.
That was an easy one.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, well, we'll see where that goes. Okay, how about cyber theft? What's going on there?
Yeah, so as a fiduciary, you do have you have to protect the plan assets basically for your plan participants. And we are just seeing, I really think that this is a place we're going to see a lot of activity because, the hackers and fraudsters out there are getting really good at what they do and are you know, taking money from these plans. These plans have so much money, taking money from participant accounts through various means. A couple suits, one that I can think of, it was a woman who somebody was able to hack into her account and took, I think, $250,000 out of her account. So she's now bringing that claim against the employer as a breach, or the fiduciary of the plan as breach of fiduciary duty for failure to protect her assets. So it's something that we need to have on top of our minds when you're selecting service providers. When I started, we didn't ask, when we did an RFP for like a record keeper, we didn't ask about their security procedures at all. Now it's one of the first things we ask, and we make sure we fully understand, you know, how they're going to keep others out of the plan. And I'm really worried about it now, especially the COVID related distribution option. That's that distribution option where you can take up to $100,000 out of your account if you're affected by the COVID crisis. And there's not a lot of authentication you have to go through to say if you're an affected participant or not. And they're going to have a lot of people asking for these distributions. And I am worried that that the fraudsters are going to take advantage of, just kind of, since these plans have kind of opened up and are wanting to give money to people who need it, that they're going to see it as an opportunity. So something to look for in your own plans.
Yeah. So that's bothersome. I can say to you that I have encountered something new over the past couple of years in a lot of clients where they actually have a cybersecurity officer now. It's kind of like a new a role, and they actually dictate policy, and so it affects committee process like it affects everything else in the company. So at least companies are starting to wake up to it, I think.
I agree.
Let's hope it's not too late. What might be on the horizon? Do you have anything kind of you're wondering if something might come?
Well, what I think we're going to start seeing a lot, as you know, so much money now in qualified plans are going into target date funds. And there hasn't been a thorough, I don't know, historically, there's maybe been a little lack of thorough review of target date funds. They're not all easy to understand. And I mean, on the face they are. And so committees are like, oh yeah, that sounds good. Now you got to dig in. So one thing that I also require my committees to do on at least an annual basis is a thorough review of their target date funds. Because I think that is just because so much money is going in there. Plaintiffs' attorneys are going to be looking at those and being like, was this target date fund really the best choice for your plan? You know, and if you don't understand your target date fund, then you're not going to be able to prove that it was the best choice for your plan participants.
And I can remember the days when whatever company I worked with, whether begin with the letter F or T or V or S or W, it was just fine if I just used the ones that began with the letter F. And that doesn't suffice anymore, huh?
Nope, it sure doesn't. And I get in arguments with some investment guys about that at the table. Not fun. So.
Well, it's all kidding aside, it is the default investment. A lot of plans, right? We have those rules called qualified default investment alternative rules. And it makes sense because a lot of people, I just counseled my son on enrolling in his first 401k. And honestly, you know, it's hard enough for them to figure out how much to put in or how do I put, what happens? It comes out before I get paid. What's going on here? And then you're asking them to become investment experts. So I kind of like how the target date fund is sort of a way for them to get a little expert advice without, you know, paying a heck of a lot for it.
Having to hire somebody.
But it does end up being the default investment, and those are the people we have to actually watch out for, don't you think?
That's exactly right.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that sounds great. What's our next slide going to hold? I think it has something to do with that process and outcomes thing we were talking about.
Oh, yeah. This is exactly it. So it's like we said, process, not outcome. There's no 2020 hindsight. You just need evidence of it. And you also need to have qualified plan advisors on your team, because you're not going to be able to prove you've made the right decision without actual people that are in the industry, counseling you on it. So you got to have the materials, you got to have the minutes, and you got to be able to show all those and what your decision process was when the Department of Labor or participant suit comes.
I've got some good questions that are coming in now. We must have uncovered something here. How often do you recommend committees meet? Quarterly seems to be overkill. What do you think?
It depends on the plan. It depends on the complexity. It depends on the size. If you're a fiduciary to a large plan and you're scared about that personal liability piece, most of my large plans meet on a quarterly basis. And if you have thousands of participants in the plan, there's going to be things to discuss every quarter. All fiduciaries do need to review the plan investments on a quarterly basis, but that doesn't mean that you have to have a formal committee meeting every quarter, but you have to look at those investments. And so as long as the smaller plans understand that, then a lot of times we'll do semi-annual meetings. We'll usually do one right after once you get the year-end report. So we'll do that in like February, and then we'll do another one once you get the June 30th report. So meet in August. That works well for smaller plans. And then I do have a few that meet on an annual basis, but those meetings can really go on and on and on. Because especially when there's legal changes like there are now, so much stuff to discuss as far as the Secure Act and the CARES Act, and then also if you have changes going on in your plan, you'll want to up from annual probably to semi-annual.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I found just as a practitioner, semi-annual works pretty well for a moderate-sized plan, but it also has a practical basis, because oftentimes in a meeting you might uncover something that needs further review. Let's say a manager's not doing so well, you want to do a search or something. And so then allowing for that off-quarter meeting, say you have semi-annual meetings when everything's gliding along pretty smoothly, but that allows you to have that off-quarter meeting to use to address those special needs that might arise from time to time. That's kind of the way I've worked with the moderate-sized plans. It seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I really dislike seeing with committees is that they'll make a decision to do something, but because they don't meet on a regular basis, then that decision just they forget about it, and it's never followed through or completed. That is the worst case scenario, to have in your minutes that you've made a decision that's in the best interest of your plan participants, and then you don't implement it. And so meeting on a more regular schedule makes sure, because the first thing I do with all of my committees is we review and approve the minutes of the prior meeting, and that can get you remembering a lot of things that might have fallen off the radar.
Gotcha. I have an interesting question here, and I'm not sure if it's meant for you or for me. Are you using a target date fund for your 401k account? Christine, I'll ask you.
I am. Yep. I think like
yes for me too, so it's 100%.
Right. Yeah, and really like for my law firm's plan, most of our assets are in those target date funds. They're very popular, which means you have a little, like, you really got to understand what they're all about.
Yep. It makes it really important, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. So I've got another good one here. How much fiduciary liability do I avoid by hiring a professional like Northwest Capital Management and doing what they recommend?
Right. A lot. It really helps to have somebody on board who is familiar with working with retirement plans and investments and all that. And I would never ever tell somebody to try to go it alone without professionals on the investment side. But it doesn't mean that all of your fiduciary liability is gone. I have had the unfortunate situation where I'm sitting at the table and the investment advisor recommends something and the committee's like, nah, I don't think we'll do that. Well, guys, there's a reason you're paying people to help you out on this. And if you have, if you show that you didn't take the recommendation, if your participants can show that you didn't take the recommendation and then something bad happens because of that, you have liability. The other place you have liability is you have the duty to monitor the service provider. So having somebody on board is great, but you have to have ongoing monitoring of that provider to make sure that they are still the right provider for the plan.
Gotcha. Okay. So they're subject to the same kind of review as any investment option in the plan.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. So they have to show that they are qualified to be that prudent expert that you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Boy, we've got some great questions rolling in here. I'm going to hit another one,
Hey.
and it's right on the slide. So how would you suggest plan sponsors best prepare for the eventual plan audit?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Basically, it's that documentation piece. It's going to be hard, 4 years from now to remember why you replaced such and such fund or why you decided to change record keepers. Maybe that won't be so hard because that's a pain, but you need to document that. You need to document fees. That's why I say you need to do a thorough fee review on at least an annual basis. And then I like to have what I like every committee to have is, you can keep all this stuff electronically, but keep the reports that your investment advisors give to you and that you review on a quarterly basis. File them away along with your minutes. It's just critical.
Got it. Okay. So I've got an interesting one here because it's gonna generate lots of different opinions, but someone's asking us to define large versus medium versus small. And it's kind of interesting. Every time you talk to a vendor, they'll have a different cutoff point. But I can tell you that the industry tends to see about somewhere in the range of $30 to $50 million as a moderate size plan or a medium size plan. And it can go up as high as 100 million as a moderate size plan, depending on the vendor, of course. Some vendors have many plans, so they have to kind of, group them different ways. I would say on lives, anything under 500 lives is probably a moderate or medium to small plan. And then you get, over 1,000 lives, you're usually kind of working your way up to the larger. But again, this can vary because you can have 1,000 lives and you can only have $20 million. Because you have, lots of people who don't save in your plan. So it does really depend. Unfortunately, people say that, but on an asset size, 50 million and down tends to be moderate to small. Small tends to be for sure under 10 million. And then 50 to, again, I don't want to confuse people too much, but 50 to say 500 million is probably a medium sized plan in most people's definitions. That might be a little high for some vendors. And then over 500 million gets into the large plan space, and particularly anything over $1 billion. So that, if that gives you some context, I hope that helps. So here's a great one, and I didn't put this in our set of discussion points, and I'm just wondering what you're going to say, Christine. This is actually in the context that it says in a small company who should be on that committee, but who should be on the committee for any size company, I guess, is probably a good question.
Yeah, it is a great question, and one of the first ones you have to address when you're setting up your committee. I think that it's important that that distinction between what I was talking about before by the settler functions and the fiduciary functions, it's important that distinction is met. And for some companies, for that reason, I will say, okay, CEO, president, you're not on this committee, because I don't think that you're going to be able to remove that settler function hat and do your fiduciary functions. But then other times you get CEOs and presidents that do understand that. But so sometimes I'll say we won't have president or CEO for that purpose. But usually your human resource person who is dealing with the plan on a daily basis, they'll be on it. Your CFO will usually be on it. Again, you got to be careful with the hats, but this is a money thing, and they usually understand that better. And then, other people that are dealing with compliance issues in your organization. I often have employers say, well, I want my employees to have buy-in on with this plan, and so I'd like some rank and file people on the committee. And again, that's where it's important, where you say, okay, but remember, they have to be acting as a prudent expert here. And if they don't understand retirement plans, and if they don't understand how this works, then I will usually dissuade people from putting rank and file on committees.
Gotcha. Okay. And so I have a similar kind of a view. I've found committees function very well if they have somebody who understands investments. So you mentioned CFO, but it could be a treasurer, it could be a controller. I mean, sometimes it doesn't have to go all the way to the top, but it's somebody who understands the money side and somebody who understands the people side. So that's the HR function.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little bothersome if HR reports to the CFO and they're both on, because then it becomes sort of like I have to do what the boss says, and each committee member has a responsibility to actually participate in the meeting actively and hold forth with their views. So the best committees are open outcry committees. I mean, they're orderly, but they let everybody speak. I've had a different kind of experience with the participant representative, but in the case of, say, a company has like a call center, or it has an industrial base. Let's say it's a wood products company, and it has a bunch of people in the mills or on the production floor. I think it really helps to have that person say to the committee what people on the floor are thinking or not thinking about the plan, because sometimes we think we can kind of guess what people are up to, but it's not so bad to have somebody who might be a reasonably good sort of sounding board for the other participants, so that they can bring that that floor concern that we may have just overlooked. So that's been helpful in the past. But I get your point. You are capturing somebody in a role that could present personal liability for them. So I don't think we mentioned this, but there is something called fiduciary liability insurance. Do you recommend that everyone have that?
Yeah, I definitely do, unless your plan is just tiny. But fiduciary liability insurance, it's different than that ERISA bond. A lot of people don't understand that it's a different product, but you're required to have that ERISA bond of 10% of plan assets up to $500,000. But that really, I mean, I've never even seen one kick in. I've never even seen, the money like has to be taken. Like you have to take the money and like run off to Mexico or something for that bond to pay out. And so for that reason, that's just kind of one of those, T's to cross. But fiduciary insurance, fiduciary liability insurance, it covers way more things as far as fiduciary liability. And so most of my committees have fiduciary liability insurance. It's one of the things that at the initial or second meeting of a committee that is just kicked off, we will review in detail. So they understand what is covered and what is not covered. And one of the things that I've been finding a lot in policies that I've been reviewing lately is they don't cover cybersecurity stuff, which I think will hopefully be changing, but that makes it even more important for the committee to be like, oh, we're not covered if somebody steals money out of this plan.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, so for those reasons, it's important to know what's in those policies
You bet.
and how much the policy is worth.
Yep, and I've heard it said too that if employer stock is in the plan, your premium for fiduciary liability coverage goes up. So
I'm sure.
It makes sense,
Yeah.
I guess, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I have a question here that is one of the great ones. I think it's one of those do the right thing questions. As a co-fiduciary, at what point should a consultant consider firing a plan sponsor client when the client shows a propensity for not following advice? What do you think,
That's a
Christine?
good one. Oh, I have had some clients like this. They're just like, they think they know better. And that's when I have to be like, time out. I'm going to talk to you like you're a child and tell you that you're paying this person for a reason. And so if you don't trust them, then you need to find somebody else. And so as far as the advisors on the other side, as the advisor, and you have a client who doesn't listen to you, I mean, that's just got to be really frustrating. And I wouldn't think that's a very enjoyable relationship at all. Like, you're doing the work and then they're not listening to you. So
Now, let me argue an opposing view, but I don't deny what you're saying. It's absolutely true that at some point, if you're not connecting, then it's time to. But and particularly if you're seeing people continually try to break the rules or go beyond the program that we described already. But I would say that as an advisor, it's also unsettling if a client says, "Yeah, whatever you say, Scott." If they never engage with you, if they never disagree, if they never if they don't really say defend your opinion, something like that. I mean, why do you recommend this? That becomes disquieting too. You're almost like you're being placed in the driver's seat and they're not coming along for the ride.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to, okay, you're off as a fiduciary to the plan, you're off the hook for investment decisions somewhat. If you have a competent advisor on board, but you still have the duty to monitor that advisor. So at the very least, you should say, okay, why do you recommend that? Yep. And if they're like, well, I just picked it out of a hat, then then you have liability, because that's not appropriate.
Right. And I guess it's sort of this give and take. I mean, I have seen some advisors actually even get miffed if the client doesn't follow their advice. I mean, I think that's kind of nutty too. I mean, if they have a perspective that is reasonable and it gets documented in the decision process, seems to me that it's their money. They have to talk too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. You need to document it. If you're not taking the recommendation of a person you're paying to give you recommendations, then you need to have reasons, and those reasons need to be documented.
Okay. I've got some great questions here, and I hate to laugh at them as they come in, because they really are. They're super good and hard to answer. I'm going to ask that we skip the next slide, because I think pretty much everybody's a little sick of COVID. It is something you can talk with your advisors about, whether or not you want to add these changes. I know, Christine, you're talking to all of your plan sponsors about whether they rush to add these, enhanced loan features, enhanced distribution features, and you mentioned that earlier. So it really comes down to make sure you're being thoughtful about this. Don't just jump because you think everybody's doing it. And the one thing I would say is some vendors are making the decision for plan sponsors, almost by making it a default that they do it. I'd be cautious about that. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. The decision to add the provisions isn't a fiduciary decision, but how you implement the program is fiduciary. So let's say you put in the COVID-related distributions, your record keeper defaults you to that. You don't really understand them. Somebody comes to you and is like, I want one of those, and they get a distribution, but they weren't supposed to because you didn't really understand the program or anything. Then that you would have some liability on that. On that side.
Okay. Okay. I think that, reasonable people can kind of, find their way through this, but they should get some help from what's everybody else doing. I think that's kind of like we like to
For
hear
sure.
about what, the mistakes that are made and how to avoid them. Okay. So I'm gonna jump onto the next slide here, guys. I think this has the tips, and we're getting lots of questions about tips. So one question that came in
Mhm.
was about minutes. How thorough do they have to, have every word, or should they be high level? What's the best kind of minutes in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't like those every word minutes, because invariably somebody will say something stupid, and then you don't want those bad in your minutes. So, I like the bullet point. The bullet point type minutes are great. Make sure everybody reviews them at the next meeting, so everybody agrees with them, and make sure that they only address fiduciary issues and not settler functions.
Got it. Got it. So that, I know that this has happened many times, that the minutes get circulated at the next meeting. Probably a good idea to get them circulated before that.
Yes, it can get awkward. Yeah, yeah, for
We
sure.
didn't say that.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, so then some other things, so there are some things that plan sponsors sometimes forget to do. You mentioned one earlier, read your plan document and follow it. That's something that people think, oh, well, we have a plan document, and they put it over on the shelf and they never read it and they forget what's in it. How about plan amendments? Sometimes people will be encouraged to do an amendment, and they'll even start to operate their plan in a way as if they've already done the amendment, but they forget to actually do the physical.
Don't actually do it. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty common. You got to make sure that you're following through. A lot of people don't understand how seriously the IRS and the DOL take plan documents. Like that is the Bible that you must follow. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you have real liability. Again, it seems kind of dumb on the outside sometimes, because it's, a lot of technical legal junk. But those are just so important, and plan amendments fall directly into that. I see that all the time.
And then I've seen this conflict between the summary plan description and the plan document. It even gets brought up in lawsuits where the summary plan description gets distributed to all the people, but the plan document said something different, or there was some conflict between the two. And then the courts will say, well, whatever you give to the participant is probably a good basis for them to operate. So what do you think?
Yeah, it happens all the time, that there's a conflict. Most summary plan descriptions will say somewhere that the document controls, that the summary plan description doesn't. But again, courts have been all over the board on that. The easiest thing to do is make sure they are the same.
Gotcha.
They say the same things.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I'm just a little bit leery about making radical changes in a plan during the such an unsettled time. Are there any issues that might make you hesitant to kind of go along with a plan who wants to, say, institute automatic enrollment or automatic escalation, or any of these other features that are being proposed to help people save more for retirement?
Right. We're getting this question a lot, and my initial reaction to any client who calls me up and is like, should we do this now? I'll say, well, what is the basis for your decision? Was this decision made before we entered into this crisis and you decided it was in the best interest of the plan participants? If the answer to that is yes, then you need to continue along that path. Again, don't make a decision and then not implement it, right? But if there's other big changes now, especially knee-jerk reactions, like I had a plan sponsor who just he was unhappy with the way his participants dealt with the market loss, because a lot of them went to cash when it was at the bottom. And he was unhappy with that, which I get, it probably wasn't the best investment decision, but he wanted to just take away all participant direction altogether. And he wanted to invest the money for all of his plan participants because he thought he'd be better at it. And that, I was like, absolutely not. We're not doing that now, because that is, that's a knee-jerk reaction that, that we're not going to be able to, to back up if a participant brings a suit about it.
Yep. Makes sense. So again, be thoughtful and document that you thought it through and what issues you considered. It all makes sense. Okay, so let's get to our summary slide. We have a couple more questions. One I feel for this person. In a small company, we can't get anybody to be on the committee because of the fiduciary liability. So is there anything that somebody can do to kind of help ease the mind of someone who is, clearly hesitant and for reasonable cause? Yeah,
for sure. That's a problem in small companies, a problem in large companies too. One is that fiduciary liability insurance, if you can get it. The other one is having a committee charter with indemnification provisions that say unless the committee member is acting with, gross negligence or malfeasance, that the company will indemnify them for any costs that are incurred or personal liability incurred to defend against claims.
Okay.
And usually once that goes in, because they feel a lot better and they're like, okay, well, at least it won't be coming out of my pocket unless I did something intentionally bad. Got it.
Okay. So I think that those are just two really, really good things. I mean, it is true that we all have personal liability, but there are ways that we can inoculate ourselves, and we've all just kind of gone through our list. So let's review our key points. We have an exclusive benefit rule, which says that we must operate in the exclusive interests of our plan participants and their beneficiaries. Interestingly enough, it adds the beneficiaries.
Yep.
Diversification is required to avoid large losses. Fees must be reasonable, not lowest, but reasonable in light of services that are offered. The prudent expert rule, which extends past the prudent man rule. A lot of people will say prudent man, but you're emphasizing it has to be an expert, someone familiar with such matters. So in other words, a person who operates in this space and does advice for plans and has for a while and knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then one that you added for my benefit, that follow the plan documents. I really find that it's a very useful, and it's one of those where we have several questions. How do we gear up for an audit or the inevitable audit? Well, make sure you're following the plan document right out of the gate. Huh?
For sure.
Makes perfect sense. Christine, I want to thank you so much. I know that we're going to planning further sessions with you. This has just been terrific. I've had some questions come in on things that are just a little bit too big to chew on today, but we're going to have another session with you. I think you've already committed to another one.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a question here on electronic delivery, and again, that is such a great question. Yep. And it's one that we could have a whole other hour of webinar about. Yep. So
you and I
hopefully we'll be addressing it at a future date.
Yeah, we discussed that one when we were preparing, and we figured that it would just be a little bit too big. But did you say something about some rules may actually be coming out here soon?
Right. So there's a proposed DOL reg that changes a lot of the current rules for electronic delivery were put in place in 2002. So a lot has changed in that space. And the DOL recognizes that, and they put out new rules that could be finalized July 1st. That's what we're kind of hearing through the grapevine. So I don't know how this current situation affects that. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully we get those final rules. But I think a webinar on the new rules, once those get finalized, will be awesome.
Yeah, okay. So that sounds like we have lots of meat for that next presentation. So we will thank you first of all for all of you for participating. It's really been an enjoyable hour for me. I didn't know that we were going to go this long, but here we are, almost at the end of the hour. And then for the great questions, I really appreciate those as well. They were good and they are solid, and we're going to get to a couple of them when we have our next session with Christine in August. In the meantime, I am going to say, have a great morning, give you back 5 minutes of your day. And I invite you to write us an email or call your plan representative if there's anything that you wanted to hear a little bit more about. You can certainly get a personal interaction that will answer those questions. Thanks so much, Christine.
Thank you guys. And thanks for your questions. This was fun.
And let's be safe and healthy out there, okay?
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.